It is finally here. The on-ice activity start for the Carolina Hurricanes as both C1 and C2 groups take the ice on Thursday morning to kick off the Hurricanes training camp, and we are just mere days from the first preseason game. Also, the Hurricanes did announce their overall camp roster and who's going to be in groups C1 and C2. We'll talk about all of that today on the Thursday edition of Locked On Hurricanes.
You're Locked On Hurricanes, your daily podcast on the Carolina Hurricanes. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to the Thursday edition of Locked On Hurricanes, your team every day, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Thank you to the Everydayer for making this your first listen of the day. 5 days a week, Monday through Friday, talking everything about your Carolina Hurricanes. I'm your host, Zach Martin. I'm the credentialed Carolina Hurricanes beat writer over at the Hot Guards, also the co-host of the Search Cast, which is a weekly Carolina Hurricanes podcast, along with all of my duties here at Locked On Hurricanes. On today's show, we're going to talk about the initial camp roster that has come out, who are in what groups for the Hurricanes between C1 and C2. Going to give over my initial thoughts when kind of looking at it and seeing, okay, why are certain guys in certain groups that they're in? And then later on, we're going to be doing the players to watch early in camp. But before we jump into all of that, today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Download the FanDuel app now by visiting FanDuel.com and win $300 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. So Wednesday afternoon, we were waiting for the camp roster to come out. Some camps had their rosters out earlier on the day on Wednesday. Some had them Tuesday, Monday, and all that stuff. The Hurricanes finally announced them on Wednesday afternoon after the, team training stuff and the initial meetings happened on Wednesday afternoon. But the team finally announced their camp rosters, and the thing too is camp starts Thursday morning. So when you're listening to this podcast, it's either hasn't started yet or has already started. So C1 starts at 9 a.m. Eastern. Group 2 starts at 11 a.m. Eastern, and both practices will be at Invisalign Arena. So heads up to everyone, if on the training camp schedule it says Invisalign, those are open to the public. If it's Lenovo, it's just media. So fans, if you are listening to this before camp, it is open to the public at Invisalign at 9 and 11. So looking at the initial groups that are here, it's 48 players. We got 22 skaters in Group 1, 20 skaters in Group 2. Then we have 3 goalies in each of the groups. So when you look at Group 1, it's mainly main roster guys on this camp. The only notable players that are on this list, one of them is being PTO Oliver Shillington. I'm very interested for the fact that he's part of the C1 group and not of the C2 group, where the other PTOs of Kevin LeBanc and Giovanni Smith are a part of, but Shillington will start camp as a C1 guy. Now, they also have Mike Riley, who they just signed in the offseason, most likely be their 7th defenseman. He is there. And the fact is the Hurricanes have 9 defensemen with C1 and 7 defensemen with C2, so that's something to keep an eye on as well. Outside of those guys, they also brought in Gavin Bayreuther, another defenseman that they signed to a 1-year, 2-way deal. He's part of that group as well. So those are kind of like your early guys to keep it on, at least for the skaters. The fact that you got Riley, who they signed, who's wearing number 6 for the Carolina Hurricanes. Then you got Gavin Bayreuther, who's going to be wearing 25 for the team. And then you got Oliver Shillington wearing 58. But the rest of the group, mainly mainstays on the roster. No real surprises there. Now, with Nikolaj Ehlers being on the team, he's wearing 27. We all know that you're looking at Kendra Miller with 19. Tyson Jost, who we'll talk about later in Group 2, Jost is actually wearing 43, so he's switching from 27 to 43 because of Walker. Now, in terms of the goalies, obviously it's Anderson and Kochetkov, no real surprise there, but when you look at who the third goalie is, it is Caden Prima, who they traded for with the Montreal Canadiens, earlier into the offseason and stuff like that, around the start free agency and all of that. His number is very interesting. He's going to be wearing number 55, which, if everyone remembers, his dad, Keith, when he was the captain of the Hurricanes, also wore 55. So be ready to see some Primo 55s. Well, at least I see a Primo 55 jersey on the ice during training camp and during preseason for the Carolina Hurricanes. Is now it's just a goalie instead of a skater. But yeah, that's mainly the big kind of early takeaways or initial, like, okay, what are we looking at for these rosters? Michael Riley's wearing 6, Ehlers 27, Miller's wearing 19, Gavin Bayreuther 25, Oliver Shillington 58. It's mainly Shillington and Bayreuther are kind of the non-main roster guys that are part of this group. Mike Riley, for me, is someone who's probably going to be the 7th defenseman. He is there, and then in terms of the third goalie, it is Caden Primo. I'm not shocked that it's Primo. We'll talk about more in Sigma 2 of why I'm not surprised that he is kind of with that group. Now, looking at the C2 skaters, this is mainly your PTOs. These are your AHL guys and stuff like that. This is not really a surprise because this is how it usually goes for the Hurricanes. Mainly guys who they know is probably going to make the roster are already with C1. Some of the guys that are most likely going to start in the AHL and all that stuff. And if you're PTOs outside of Shillington, surprisingly enough, they will start here as your C2 group. So, like I said, Tyson Jost is wearing 43. That's kind of the main thing here. Looking at goalies, Amir Mifikov is going to wear 35. You got Nikita Kwap and you got Ruslan Kaisev, who had a pretty good rookie showcase, all things considered. Giovanni Smith is wearing number 42. He's part of that group. And then Kevin LeBanc is wearing 61 for the Hurricanes. Another small note, this was from the player himself. Charles Alexis Legault does not have a hyphen in his first name. So it's still Charles Alexis, but there is no hyphen there. And obviously the same cast of characters, Ryan Suzuki, Josiah Slavin, Bradley Nadeau, all those guys, no Gunler, no real changes here. Ivan Rybkin is going to be wearing 49 in the camp as well. Yaska, 54. Goat's wearing 62. Medica is wearing 67. Gleb Shriksoff, 73. Skylar Brennamore is going to be wearing 76. Dominic Sori, 89. And Rowan Seeley, 91. So, and then with the goaltending, we already know what they're at. So that's kind of initially looking at the two groups, and that's how they kind of break down the groups going into training camp. Is you got your C1, it's your main group, it's your NHL guys. Maybe you're going to have a couple extra there, depending on, are they kind of like maybe bubble guys, or it's like, hey, we know you've gotten more AHL experience. We want to see you up here with the main roster guys and see how you fare in that group. So that's why you see like a Gavin Bayreuther who's played in the NHL. And why you also see, like I said, an Oliver Shillington who's also played in the NHL, of course, most of it with the Calgary Flames. But those are the type of guys you'll kind of see in the C1 group. And a lot of the AHL guys are a lot of the PTO guys that are kind of like, we'll see how you do, are mainly part of your C2s. And it makes sense when we look at the goaltending of why you brought 6 goalies in. You're going to split them up 3 and 3. And I feel like with your third goalie, that's why you kind of have them up there with your main tandem of Anderson and Kochetkov. So it makes sense why you see Caden Primo there. But that's kind of what you're looking at with your two groups. NHL guys, AHL, PTOs. Like I said, first practice starts on Thursday morning, or this morning when you're listening to the show, at 9 a.m. for Group 1, and then Group 2 as at 11 a.m. I don't know about you guys, but I'm super excited for the fact that, it's not regular season hockey. Preseason doesn't start until next Monday, but at least we're finally in a spot to where, okay, hockey's back in some aspects. It's training camp, it's preseason, but now we actually get to talk about guys on the ice, kind of get a little bit more of an idea of the storylines, what we're looking for and stuff like that, instead of just speculating. There will still be some speculating going on, but now it's just, well, what are we going to imagine it's going to be like? Now we get to see guys on the ice for the first time, and it's going to be very exciting to see how all that plays out. So we kind of talked about the camp roster. What are my thoughts overall and kind of what am I seeing and how I'm feeling about this, camp roster and where certain guys are at? Stick around and I'll let you know about all that here in a second on a Thursday edition of Locked on Hurricanes. The NFL season is here, and FanDuel is making sure you're ready for kickoff with a can't-miss offer. Right now, new customers can bet just $5, and if your bet wins, you'll get $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. It makes every game more exciting, whether you're watching your team or just keeping an eye on your fantasy lineup. Are you watching the Panthers, the Chargers, you're watching the Eagles, the Buccaneers, all that type of stuff. It's quick, it's easy, and the best way to add a little more energy to your Sundays. So, are you ready to play? Download the FanDuel app now by visiting FanDuel.com to get started. That's FanDuel.com to place your first $5 bet. Welcome back to segment 2 of Locked On Hurricanes, your team every day. All right, so we kind of talked about the initial camp roster that came out and, kind of just seeing like who's kind of certain, where certain guys are at, jersey numbers, stuff like that. Well, how are the groups kind of broken down? And for me, initial thoughts is, I kind of said in segment 1, it makes sense why you look at Caden Primo, why he's with the main tandem goalies off Kochetkov and Anderson, because I feel like with the fact that the Hurricanes did that sign and trade for Primo, gave up the 2026 7th, signed him to a 1-year deal. I feel like the Hurricanes look at him as your break glass in case of emergency, as your number 3 goalie in case of an injury, because, after winning 22 games last year with the Laval Rocket, his best season by far, he does have some NHL experience, and it's mostly with the Canadians, and NHL numbers are great, but take with a grain of salt. They weren't really great Canadian teams in front of him. But I feel like the Hurricanes view him as like their number 3 goalie. So I think that makes sense why you have him being up there, because if you're looking at who's going to be the goalie that you want to learn the most with your main tandem of Anderson, Kochetkov, Primo is that guy to be your 3rd goalie. So that makes sense of why he's there. I know I did talk about it a little bit in segment 1, but it's very interesting to look at Oliver Shillington being the only PTO with the Group 1 skaters, because most of the other PTO guys are with the second group, and the fact that you have 9 defensemen in your top group of C1, but only 7 in your C2 group, because you also have Mike Riley, who a lot of people consider as your number 7 defenseman coming into the season, because you signed him to a 1-year contract at $1.1 million. But then you also got Gavin Bayreuther, who is another guy you got in free agency on a 1-year, 2-way deal. And the thing is, Shillington's a left shot, so is Bayreuther, and so is Riley. So for me, it's interesting how you look at that defensive group, because you got your main 6, then you got your 7th and Riley, but then you have 2 other defensemen on top of that. That's why I'm very interested to see why they have so many defensemen with that main group. My guess is because of the fact that, with Shillington and Bayreuther, they do have some NHL experience. I guess they want to see how those guys work with them. So it'll be interesting to see. I'll say this. I know everyone's excited for these guys, and I know I'm excited for them, because you're looking at Nikolaj Ehlers, Keandre Miller, and Alexander Nikishin in their first camps with the Hurricanes. Because we all know that, Alexander Nikishin came over. Of course, that was during the playoffs. So this is like his first real training camp on North American ice, and it's with the Hurricanes. So I know a lot of fans, and even me included, are excited to watch to see how Nikishin does in his first camp. Now, I know he's been working on his English in the offseason. I'm really curious to see where it's at right now. But now you get to see him on the ice with the Canes, and you're looking, okay, well, how has his offseason progression been? How has his training been? And now we can see what it looks like on an on-ice product with the Canes. Now you're giving a full train camp to get used to the system, rather than just, all right, we're going to throw him for a few practices, kind of hold you out for the first round, part of the second round, and then here you go, Eastern Conference final against the Panthers. So that'll be very interesting to see how he does on his first, full training camp with the Canes. And the same thing with, Nikolaj Ehlers and Keandre Miller. Ehlers played his whole career with the Jets. Now this is his first Canes camp, and Miller, his first Canes camp as well, because the rest of that has been with the New York Rangers. So now you're seeing what these guys look like on the ice for the Hurricanes. So now you got 3 really exciting guys going through their first camps with the Canes, and they're going to be prominent guys on the roster. Like, you look at Ehlers, top 6 guy, top line with Aho and probably Jarvis, top power play unit. So I'm excited to see what Ehlers does, and now you get to see him in Carolina Hurricanes colors. You look at Keandre Miller, the last week or so he's been back in Raleigh, kind of going through the paces with the guys, getting some early ice work in. So you kind of know what he looks like in practice jerseys, but now you're going to see train camp. What's he going to be in? The Hurricanes jersey with number 19 on his back, going into the start of the going into the preseason that starts on Monday. So now you get to see him. Big acquisition on the start of free agency with that sign and trade with the Rangers. You lock him up for 8 seasons. What does that look like for him? So two of your biggest acquisitions are going to be on the ice for the first time together. And then, like I said, you also got Nikish in there. That's going to be a very big thing to look at. Like I said, we mentioned the goalies. You got Anderson, Kochetkov, and you got Primo. Those are guys to keep a watch. Those are some exciting things to look at when you're talking about initial thoughts on this. Skinner 2 group, this is what I'm really curious about, because this is mainly your AEHL guys and your PTOs, but Shillington isn't part of that second group, but then you have Tyson Jost, who is down there. And for me, because you guys have heard me say it all offseason, it kind of felt like Tyson Jost was going to be one of your healthy extras. With him starting on the C2 group, do the Hurricanes feel like that there may be that other extra forward might be up for grabs? Because Alexander carries with the first group, and right now I feel like he might be the odd man out with the fact you got Hall, Svetch, Martinuk, Stankoven, Blake, and Eric Robinson. You have a lot of your wingers kind of already set for the most part, because Ehlers and Jarvis and Svechnikov are listed in your top 6, and who else is in your top 6 with Stankoven and Blake and all them. So it might be. So is it Ehlers? Probably one of the extra healthy scratches, probably. But then it remains to be seen. Like, okay, who's your extra forward? And right now, the Hurricanes don't really have any extra forwards outside of Carrier, because they're carrying 9 defensemen instead of having your 7 defensemen and, whatever other forward. And, of course, this is a training camp roster for Group 1. Things will change between now and October 9th, but it does beg the question, why is Jost there? So it makes me wonder if that 14th forward spot going to be up for grabs, or are the Hurricanes going to run with 8 defensemen in the regular season and 1 extra forward? Who knows? I think that's definitely something to keep an eye on for sure. But those are kind of the initial thoughts. And you look at goaltending, like I said, Miftakov makes sense. He's probably going to be back in a Primo in the AHL. Of course, he's been with Kwap and Kaisev. That's, you're excited for Ivan Rybkin for his first camp with the Hurricanes after being drafted. He looked pretty decent in the rookie showcase. You're excited to see what Bradley Nadoga do, because he's someone that had a really good camp last year, killed it for the American League, did really good at the rookie showcase again. Is he someone that could maybe make some moves? Justin Robidoux played really well too. Even Charles Alexis Legault looked really good in the prospect showcase. So there's a lot of things to keep an eye on, at least for just initial thoughts of like who's where, why it makes sense for certain guys to be where they're at. So in the initial camp roster, most of it makes sense. There are a couple guys at different spots where it makes you kind of wonder where the Hurricanes are looking at. And like I said, if Tyson Jost is kind of starting with the second group, are the Hurricanes going to be possibly looking at 8 defensemen to start the next season with? Or are they leaving that 14th forward spot as a free spot for see if someone from that C2 group could make a case to make the main roster? Who really knows? But like I said, it's day 1 of on-ice stuff with camp. We are still 21 days away from the start of the regular season, so anything can happen between now and then, and we still have a bunch of preseason games to get through. But it's always good to look at the initial roster, at the initial groups, and be like, what can we take from this? What are we kind of looking at? So it'll be very interesting. Now, that being said, who are the players to watch early on in camp? We'll stick around. I'll let you know who I'm going to be watching, maybe who you guys should watch as well. here in a second on a Thursday edition of Locked On Hurricanes. Most people can't name all their financial accounts or even what they're worth, whether it's 401ks, properties, or investments. And when you don't have a full picture, you can end up leaving money on the table. That's why there is Monarch Money. It's an all-in-one personal finance tool that brings your entire financial life together in one clean, easy-to-use interface on your laptop or your phone. Monarch is built for people with busy lives. If you've put off organizing your finances, Monarch is for you. Monarch does the heavy lifting for you. You can link all your accounts in minutes, see clear data visuals, get smart categorization of your spending, and finally feel in control of your money without ever touching a spreadsheet. Maximizing investments, increasing your savings rate, easily reviewing your finances with your partner or financial advisor, keeping a clear view of your financial wealth week to week and long term. Don't let financial opportunities slip through the cracks. Use code LOCKEDONNHL at monarchmoney.com in your browser for half off your first year. That's 50% off your first year at monarchmoney.com with the code LOCKEDONNHL. Welcome back to segment 3 of Locked On Hurricanes, your team every day. So like I said, we kind of looked at, looking at the initial camp roster, significant, number changes, where certain guys are at. And then we kind of talked about, initial thoughts. What are we kind of looking at? Where are certain guys at? Why does it make sense for some players to be with group 1 compared to group 2 and all that? Now we get to move on to who to keep an eye on at camp early on. And for me, it's going to sound like a broken record, I know, guys. It's the 2C spot for the Carolina Hurricanes. Obviously, right now, it is Jesperi Kotkaniemi. Like I said, I do like his game. I do like his defensive side of the game. I know I've been kind of hard on him a little bit, but it's just because that he's got the talent. It's just, unfortunately, he's in a bad spot with where his skill set's at. He definitely is a 3C for the Hurricanes, but unfortunately, you got Jordan Staal there. So it makes it hard to put a guy who's really a 3C guy in that spot when there's another 3C there. And you really can't put him in the 4C spot because I feel like he's a little bit better than that. It's just he's in a weird spot overall. Do I want him to succeed as the 2C? Yeah. If he just gets you at least 40 points this season, I think you're in a good spot. Defensively, he's great. Defensively, he has no problems because he's basically like a Jordan Staal 2.0 where he'll shut the other team down. He's physical. His physical game is amazing. His defensive side of the game has no issues. It's just you got to find the twine for your second line center. So if you get him 40 points, and if he keeps his defensive side up, I think that goes a long way. Plus, with his faceoffs, he wins over 50% of his faceoffs every year since he joined the Carolina Hurricanes, and that's something the Hurricanes really pride themselves on is guys who can win their faceoffs with Aho, Kotkaniemi, and Staal. That's a great 1-2-3 to win faceoffs and keeps possession, which is what the Hurricanes thrive on. So I'm keeping my eye on Jesperi Kotkaniemi, and really not just him, but I think the 2C conversation. I know there's some initial thoughts of maybe do you see Logan Stankoven get some time there? Sounds like they're not going to have Seth Jarvis go there, so it sounds like it might be KK kind of getting the bulk of the minutes there. I think that's someone you're going to have to keep an eye on for sure. I would say look at the defensive pairings for Alexander Nikishin, because right now the Hurricanes have 4 left shot defensemen and they have 2 right shots. And that's not even including Mike Riley, who's your 7th defenseman, who's also a left shot. But with him and Jesperi, they got to play on both sides of the ice, and even Slavin too. So do you move Slavin over to the right side and move up Nikishin to the first line, or is it going to be Slavin and Miller as your first pairing, but Slavin's playing on his offhand? Then is it Nikishin, Jalen Chatfield as your second pair, which wouldn't be bad at all? Then you're looking at Jesperi and Walker. Or is it going to be, is it Nikishin with Slavin, or is it Nikishin with Walker? Because Walker's got a good defensive side of his game. And I also know we all know how amazing Jacob Slavin is, let's be honest. So I think that's another guy to keep an eye on is Nikishin, and mainly with that is who's his defensive pair partner, because with the Hurricanes, and especially Rod, he really likes to keep his defensive pairs going kind of through camp and the preseason. So, but I think with the fact that they're going to try to find a guy that fits with them and someone's going to play on their offside, I think that's where the pairings are going to be maybe a little bit more jumbled and kind of moved around as training camp and preseason goes along, because I think this is the first time in a while the Hurricanes are kind of playing with a lopsided handedness where, like I said, you have 4 lefties and 2 right shot defensemen. It's like I said, they're going to put someone on their offside. So I think that's something that I'm really going to keep an eye on, is just who's playing on the offside, then who's paired with who, and who's Nikisha going to be with, who is Miller going to be with, because this is both these guys' first camps with the Hurricanes, and you got to figure who they're pairing with. So I think that's something to really keep an eye on outside of the 2C spot. And I would say, how do the forward lines look like? Because, like I said, I know it's 21 days away. Anything can change between now and then, but like, who's on that top pair with Ehlers and Aho? Is it Jarvis? Is it Svechnikov? Is it Jackson Blake? Then it goes into who's on the second line. Who's with KK? Is it Hall and one of those 2 guys? Is it Stankoven? Is it Jarvis? Is it Blake? Is it Hall on the one side? Is it Svechnikov on the other side? Then in that case, who's on that third line? Who's on the fourth line with Robinson and Jankowski? I think that's going to be very interesting to watch as well, because, like I said, most of that C1 group are your NHL mainstays. And in that case, who is going to be kind of paired where out of that group? Who's lining up with who? I think that's kind of the big thing of how's your top 6? How's your top 9 look? How's your fourth line look? Because you have Jankowski for another season. You just signed Eric Robinson to a 4-year extension. You still got Carrier for another 5 seasons. And if he's going to be someone that might be a healthy extra with all the other forwards on your wings, is he okay with being the extra guy on the ice? So that's going to be something to keep an eye on as well, of your top 6, top 9. Who's your extra? Who are you going to be pairing with too? That's going to be the main thing with that, and not just outside of the defense of who's going to be with Nikisha, who's going to be with Miller. So there's definitely going to be a lot of, I think, position battles, a lot of jumbling around the roster. We're probably going to see a lot of roster jumbling just between the training camp practices, preseason games, and all that stuff. So it definitely should be interesting to see when you kind of look at something like that. But I mean, at least, like I said, at least we got camp. At least we're kind of seeing what's going on with the Carolina Hurricanes right now. We have numbers, we got guys, we have the groups. Now it's just kind of, all right, maybe it's not as speculative, but we're still going to speculate a lot with the fact that we're 3 weeks away from the start of the season. And of course, we don't know what the rosters are going to look like come October 9th, but at least we have an idea of what we're going to be kind of looking for as on-ice activities go on. Who's staying with C1? Does someone move down to C2? Does someone really show out in C2, move up to C1? How are defensive pairings going to be? How are forward lines going to look like? You want to see the development of the goalies too with, how does Anderson look? How does Kochetkov look? How does Keaton Primo look being the third goalie with that main group? And you're looking at your other goalies as well in C2 to see where their progression's at. So a lot to keep an eye on, but it's good the fact that we at least got camp. We have stuff to look forward to now and kind of look at on-ice product and not just look at a screen and look at a piece of paper and be like, what could work here? What could we be seeing here? Now we actually get to see some visuals from the ice itself, and I'm super excited for that. Should be a lot of fun. I know it's not the season. I know we're not at preseason yet, but at least we got some on-ice activities for your Carolina Hurricanes, and I'm super excited about it. I don't know about you guys, but I am so ready, and I'm so glad that we at least got camp back for sure. That will do it for the first episode of Locked On Hurricanes. Thank you for making your first listen today. You're with the Locked On NHL podcast, where there is no off-season, bringing you the daily league-wide stories that matter the most with the local coverage you love from Locked On. Find Locked On NHL on YouTube or wherever you listen to your podcast. If you want to keep up with me, I'm at OneShootZach on X. The podcast is LO_Hurricanes. I'm also on Blue Sky, Zachary Martin, where if you click the link tree in my bios, you can find all of my written content at thehockeyrice.com. I've been putting out a lot of stuff recently, and the most latest one is going to be about the training camp roster and stuff to look at for all of that. If you want to check out my other podcast, it is the Search Cast on all podcast platforms and on YouTube. For Locked On Hurricanes, we're on Spotify, Google, Apple, iHeartRadio, wherever you listen to your podcast. Make sure to leave a 5-star rating and review, so I might just read it on the show. For YouTube, it's Locked On Hurricanes. Subscribe, hit the bell notifications so you don't miss the show. Hit the thumbs up to let me know if you like the show as well. Share with other Caniacs to become everydayers just like you. But hope everyone enjoyed the Thursday edition of Locked On Hurricanes. Enjoy your Thursday. Have fun getting all the training camp content, and I'm excited to bring that to you guys as well. But until next time, as always, let's go Canes.